So, the third 9 weeks in our E3 A plus curriculum takes a step outside of the American literature sequence and focuses upon the text of Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. So, the goal here is to expose students to an antiquated and complex text that proves to be relevant and worthy for its rhetorical construction. Before students dive into Caesar, they'll begin reading and analyzing Lincoln's first inaugural address and Lyndon B. Johnson's The American Promise address. And this is very significant because these pair well with the two funeral speeches that are within Julius Caesar and look at the effectiveness of the classical rhetorical strategies and how they span time periods. So, the premise here is to prepare students for constructing effective argument writing because that is asked of them on standardized exams such as the ACT. So, now let's think about the idea of the vertical progression that students that are at A plus schools should have experienced by the time they reach you in 10th grade. So, if you are not new to A plus college ready and the E3 curriculum, and your students are not new to it, then you should be able to allow them to read more independently the text of Julius Caesar. At the point that they reach your 10th grade class, they will have been exposed to 3 different Shakespearean texts. And this is significant when we consider that our end result is wanting to wean them off the scaffolds and allow them to be as independent as possible. Those of you that are new to A plus College Ready are going to be able to reap those benefits in the near future. So think about how differently your class might run if you didn't have to spend so much time on scaffolds in order to prepare your students to read these Shakespearean texts. So now let's look at the third 9 weeks big picture. As we're looking at the third 9 weeks big picture, I want us to notice that within the first 2 weeks, we have Lincoln's first inaugural address, and we have Lyndon B. Johnson's The American Promise speech. We have several activities and lessons that deal with both of these, and they lead us up to the reading of Julius Caesar. So the big idea in third 9 weeks is the search for an ideal world. And we'll talk more about that big idea and those defining questions in a minute. But again, as you are working through the big picture, it's very imperative for you to think about how these big questions and these big ideas lend themselves to each of the text in order to make this progression relevant to students. So, unlike the Scarlet Letter in the second 9 weeks, if you will notice that within the third 9 weeks, you have days such as right here, Julius Caesar Act 1, Julius Caesar Act 2, Julius Caesar Act 3, where you are looking at some whole class reading. There is this time devoted to the whole class reading because it can be daunting for students to read Shakespearean texts, and we want to make this accessible to them. And we want to make sure that they are reading this proficiently and effectively. So, also, as you are reading and you are using this class time, make certain that you are understanding that it's the teacher's responsibility to formatively assess students as you are reading. Now, we do have many assignments that are in place, such as the anticipation guide, some multiple choice practice, a prompt discussion, a prompt deconstruction, and a timed writing, all dealing with Julius Caesar. But as your students are going through this text, you might think that they need some more practice, and that will be to your discretion. Also, notice that it is your responsibility to provide a summative assessment for Julius Caesar. Lastly, within the third 9 weeks, notice that we move into the idea of transcendentalism. So again, we go back to the time period designation by the Alabama Course of Study, and we're looking at texts such as Self-Reliance, Nature, Walden, Oh Captain, My Captain. We're asking students to think about how these ideas of transcendentalism, again, connect to the big idea and those questions in the search for an ideal world. So let's look at that, the big questions and the big idea that are going to guide us for the third 9 weeks. So within this 9 weeks, the big idea is the search for an ideal world, like I've said, and the defining questions are: what is the relationship among morality, idealism, and power? Is morality based on a universal understanding, or is morality based on the expectations of a culture? What happens when an individual's personal system of morality comes into conflict with society's definition of morality? Within this 9 weeks, there are multiple opportunities for students to be able to discuss and present their individual ideas. And as you're going through these lessons and as you are progressing through this curriculum, you should notice that within this 9 weeks, students are more apt to speak in class, and you will most likely really enjoy the responses that you get from them. And then lastly, let's look at two Marzano elements that are very significant within this 9 weeks. The first being that of using informal assessments of the whole class. So notice that we have some strategies here: confidence rating techniques, voting techniques, response boards, unrecorded assessments. And so these are going to be some of those formative assessments that we use throughout our teachings. And so a lot of these could fall within our reading of Julius Caesar. Also, if you'll notice with the confidence rating techniques, like we talked about with our proficiency scale, this gives the opportunity for students to rate their confidence depending on a lesson or a skill that has been presented to them. And then lastly, another element that is prevalent throughout the third 9 weeks is the element of processing content. So this element gives you, again, some strategies that will help you present ideas to your students in order to help them process this content in ways that are beneficial to them. And please notice within the introduction to processing content that this involves students actively processing new information. So we need to make sure that we give our students that opportunity in order to actively process.